Today I'm going to tell you step by step all the things you need to know to be able to successfully foundation paper piece. We're going to make this cute little block together. It's one of my 6-inch Scrappy Triangles, and you can find a link to the pattern below. Before we get started, let's gather up all the things we'll need to foundation paper piece. I'm using the foundations in my Scrappy Triangle foundation pad, but these instructions apply to any foundation paper piece block, whether it's pre-printed or you print out the foundation yourself. So after we have foundations, we of course need fabric. So the sky's the limit. Choose your favorite fabrics. You'll also need flathead pins. The ball head pins won't work for what we need them for, or some glue stick, either just regular school glue stick or a specialty glue stick, rotary cutter, a ruler, and a regular ruler and or add a quarter ruler. This makes trimming really nice and easy. You might also want to have a water pen. This is handy if you're having a hard time removing the foundations at the end. You of course will need a mat, sewing machine, all thread, all the basics. And now that we have it, let's get foundation paper piecing. The first step in foundation paper piecing is to prepare your foundations. If you're using my Scrappy Triangle pad, all you have to do is find the foundation you want to use and just rip it on out. Isn't that fun? And you're ready to go. Now, lots of foundation patterns though come as a PDF and you either copy or print them yourself. Here's the same foundation printed out. When you print foundations, there are a few more things to keep in mind. First, when you are printing them, make sure that in the printer window, the sizing is set to 100% and fit to size is not checked. Most foundations will have a 1-inch square printed on it so that you can measure it and make sure that the foundation printed to size. If it looks good. If it did not, go check your printer settings. If you know what size the block is, you can also measure the block itself. So I know this finishes at 6 inches, so I can line up the top, line up the bottom, 6 inches. I'm good to go. I will often, at this point, trim off the top and bottom, just so there's a little less paper to deal with. All right, let's get started. So now that we have our foundation, we're going to want to do the fun part, choose out the fabrics. The fabric pieces need to be at least a 1/2 inch larger than the section they go in. For example, we have section 1 right here. That's going to be the first piece of fabric I put down. The fabric that I used needs to be at least 1/2 inch wider and at least a 1/2 inch longer. So you can hold this up to hold it up to the light, look through and make sure it is. This I know for sure it is, right? So if I wanted to, and I do, I can just kind of trim off that bit. I know this is for section 1 and put it aside. You might also, if you're doing a lot of pieces, you might want to label this section 1. So I'm going to kind of keep it up here so I can audition some other fabrics. So I think right now I'm going to put blue up there. But see, and this is the fun part, the scrappy part, the getting to play around with stuff. I think that's too light next to it. I think that's good. All right, so we're gonna use this for section 2. Double check, 1/2 inch wider, yes, and make sure that it's a 1/2 inch longer on both sides. Yep, you can I'm putting it to the side there so I can see the line. Yep, trim it off. We're good to go. Now, lots of times foundations have triangles. So you could just, you know, put a piece of fabric like that on it and be good to go. But if it fits with your design, it's more fabric effective to cut a square in half on the diagonal and use each half of the square in these sections. So, but the real question is, what size of square? I'm glad you asked. So what do you need to do to figure that out is to measure how long one of these sides is. Not the diagonal side, the other one. It's just about 2 inches. And then to have more than enough room, add 2 inches to whatever this measurement is. In this case, it would be 2 plus another 2 would be 4 inches. You can go down as low as maybe adding 1.5 inches if you're really careful. And let's go over here and see what we got. Hopefully, I'd really like to use this one. This square is 3 inches. This strip is 3 inches wide. That's not gonna work. But, okay, I think we got it. Measure this, yep, more than 4 inches. And if you don't mind trimming off a little bit extra, feel free to use a piece that's bigger than 4 inches. So, and the sides on this aren't exactly even, but it doesn't matter because we're going to be doing trimming. We're going to trim everything up as we sew, which is one of the reasons why I like foundation paper piecing so much, is that you don't have to be exact all the time. Actually, I don't think I like this piece. It kind of jumps out and doesn't fit with the rest of them. And that's why it's important to lay things out, because sometimes you might change your mind. So I'm going to, I think, use this. It's a little matchy, but I think I'd rather have a bunch of shades of pink than have one shade of orange stick out. So we've got this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and now 5. I'm gonna look for something that contrasts well with it. I think I'm liking that yellow best. Okay, yellow it is. And then save all your scraps for your next block. The instructions give the measurement that's needed for this large background triangle, because you're going to be using the same triangle over and over again if you're making my Scrappy Triangle blocks. You'll cut 7 3/4 inch squares and then cut them in half on the diagonal. You can go up to 8-inch squares if you want to have tons of wiggle room, but this should be just fine. The first thing to do is to now take our foundation, turn it over, and place the first piece of fabric right side up over section number 1. At this point, you can move it around a little bit, hold it up to the light, make sure that it's in the right place. The whole section and seam allowance should be covered, and the fabric should extend past section 1 with about 1/2 inch or more on either side. Once you've done that, held it up to the light, verified that you're good to go, just pin it in place. Once your first piece is pinned in place, you'll take a piece of cardstock. This is a postcard that I have, and you'll put it on the line that runs between sections 1 and 2. Place it on the line and then fold the foundation back. After it's folded back, we're going to trim this off so we can line up our other piece of fabric with this nice straight edge. So you can do this with a regular ruler. Just line the 1/4 inch line up with the edge of the paper. You might also, especially if you're someone that needs readers like me, you may want to use add a 1/4 inch ruler. It has a little groove here, a 1/4 inch away from the edge that butts right up to that paper. And so even if you're not watching or looking at what you're doing, you can feel that it's lined up and there's no squinting, no messing up, no wiggling of the ruler. You're good to go. All right, now that we have this all trimmed up, we're going to take our second piece of fabric, place it right sides together with the first, and then I like to pin this in place, especially if I'm working with larger pieces of fabric that might like flip around. We don't want these loose tails flipping all over. So I'm going to put another pin down here. That'll just help keep everything in place. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to start at least a 1/4 inch before this line and continue past the line. Right, now that we're over to the sewing machine, the first thing you're going to do is decrease your stitch length. I like to decrease mine to 1.5. Decreasing the stitch length means that the needle pokes more holes in the paper, and so it'll be easier to tear off. So if you're finding that you're having a hard time tearing off your papers, first step is to decrease your stitch length and see if that helps. We're going to start sewing about a 1/4 inch before this line. And because we folded back the foundation, there's a little bit of a crease, and we can just line our foot up with that and go. There's no reason to backstitch, just sew on the line. That's all there is to it. We're just sewing on the line. And I'm gonna go past the seam allowance. Yay, that's it. I'm gonna go back over to my cutting table. We've sewn on the line that separates section 1 from section 2. And I'm gonna take out these pins. And we can just open this up. Looks great. At this point, you need to press that seam open. Some quilters like to finger press or press with their fingernail. Some quilters like to use a ruler. I prefer regular old pressing with an iron. So that's what I do, but find what works best for you. When you're pressing, don't use steam, as it could cause the foundations to bleed, especially if you printed them yourself. And also, if it starts to curl, it's your iron set too high. Just turn it down a little bit. All right, we are done. At this point, you're going to want to hold this up to the light and double check that these fabrics indeed cover all of section 1 and 2, and they extend at least a 1/2 inch outside those lines. They do, so let's get going. Next, we're going to attach section 3. This is we're going to be using our fabric that we cut from squares. So they'll go right here. Now I'm going to show you a quick piecing trick. Because these are on different parts of the foundation and they don't build off of each other in any way, we can trim both of these lines at once. We can trim this line, and then go over to the sewing machine and sew both of these on. Even though we're going to be trimming both of them, let's trim number 3 first. So put it on the line between section 2 and 3. Fold back. The lighter paper makes it really easy to fold back. Also, the lighter paper that are in these foundation pads make it easier to see through the fabric to be able to tell if your fabric is positioned correctly. All right, got this trimmed, and then we're going to go over to this side and trim this. If you're making multiple blocks, especially of the same type, you could do all of the trimming at once and get them all prepped and then head over to the sewing machine. All right, so let's see. We're gonna put this over here and this over here. Because these are oversized, this little triangle is gonna extend over into this section and it'll probably get sewn on when I do that seam. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin section 3 in place, making sure if I pinch right here at the top of it, I can also look over there and see where I'm pinching. Way up there, I'm more than okay. Actually, I'll probably come down a little bit. And if you really can't quite tell if it's going to cover, you could put some basting stitches in or use a pin there to mimic sewing. Fold it over, hold it up to the light, and test to see if it covers. It does, so we're just going to go over and sew that right now. Again, I'm going to pin this little edge down so it doesn't flip around when we flip over the paper. And I'll take this with me to the sewing machine so I can sew it on right after I sew this. Okay, so I have my foundation with the next pieces on and my fabric that I'm going to add later. So we flip the foundation over to the printed side. You can lift it up to double check that everything's in order. So we're starting about a 1/2 inch before the line starts and just sewing right on the line and then sewing off through the seam allowance. And take these pins out and open this up and place this second triangle in place right here. No getting up, just get it done. All right, I'm gonna pin that right by the seam edge, actually parallel to the seam so you don't bump into it. And then I'll pin both of these tails down. I'm just gonna catch the one we just sewed and the one we are sewing. Pin those in place so they don't move anywhere. Flip it over and sew on the line between section 2 and 4 in this case. Sometimes the next section you sew on, this is the 4th section I'd add, isn't right next to the 3rd section. It could be anywhere in the foundation. The designer would have indicated the order of adding the pieces that made the most sense and that made piecing the block like this possible. Starting a 1/2 inch before, we're just sewing. This is just, once you get down to it, foundation paper piecing is pretty simple. You trim, you sew, you press, and you repeat. That's it. That is it. So we've sewn, now it's time to press and trim. Now that we've sewn the 2 triangle sections on, it's time to press. And you're pressing these just like you would any other quilt block that you sew. Just press it all the way open. I like to give it a little tap with the edge of my iron just to make sure that it's open all the way. Yay! It's looking so cute. We're gonna add this yellow fabric next. Now, we're doing the same thing. We're gonna trim, but this time trimming is a little bit different. This is section 5, so we're gonna sew along the line that separates section 5 from 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we'll put our postcard or cardstock on that line. But because we've started sewing before the line, these fabrics are stuck on. And that's okay, you just gently tear them off. And you're good to go. And trimming just makes everything so clean and neat on the back of your block, and it makes it really easy to line up the fabric pieces and make sure that they're going to work. Now, you might be tempted to place the fabric like this by the edge of the triangle, but let me show you why that's not going to work. Let's turn over the foundation so we can see the side, front, we can see all the lines. So you're going to want to pay attention when you place this to where it opens. If we place the end of the fabric piece here, it wouldn't cover up all of section 5 when I pressed it back. So going to center it, and a trick that I learned is to put your hands on either side of the fabric piece, and then you can see how wide it is, where it's going to open up. And I know this is, my section 5 ends right there, so I have more than enough space. But better safe than sorry. Again, we're gonna line up our yellow piece with the edge of our trim piece and go sew. Now this seam is a little bit different because we have the seam allowance right there. You're going to want to start sewing outside of the seam allowance and just continue through the seam allowance onto the line. Off the side of the foundation. We've sewn this line, and we'll take out our pins, and just like any long seam, I do like to set the seam before I press it open. Is this necessary? No. You can still be doing your finger pressing or using a seam roller, but it just makes me feel good. Yay, it's coming together. At this point, I kind of like, if I see anything that's obviously outside of the foundation, I like to kind of just trim it up just so that I don't have extra fabric bits flapping around when I'm at the sewing machine. But it's definitely not necessary. Again, we're put on section 5, going to add section 6, put the postcard on the line between section 5 and 6, trim, and we've got a nice straight edge, and we're ready to add our next piece. This is one of those 7 3/4 inch squares cut in half. I love how the pink looks with it. Okay. And we're going to line it up in the middle. Because these pre-printed foundations are square, I know that if the little triangle that pokes out over here is the same height as the little triangle poking out there, that it's pretty much centered. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's enough wiggle room in the dimensions that it can be off a little bit. Again, I'm going to put a couple of pins along here, and also, especially when I turn this over to sew, there's a very real possibility this could flip over. So, like with all our pieces, I'm going to add an extra pin to keep everything in place. I'm going to go sew this and then come back and do a final press and talk about trimming the block to size. All right, let's press this open, and we're almost done with this block. It is so cute. And one of the things I like most about these Scrappy Triangle blocks is that they're so much fun. You can, like, I want to make another one because I want to take all of these extra fabric scraps and try to use them in a different color combination with the next blocks. There's just so many, anyway, so many fun options. All right, pressed, looks great. Hold it up to the light. The whole block, all the way out to the dotted lines, is covered with fabric. So now we need to trim it all up so that it's 6.5 inches square. When you're trimming, you want to cut along the dotted line, but it's really hard to see and line up the dotted line with the edge of the ruler. So it's a lot easier to line up the 1/4 inch mark on your ruler with this solid inner block line. And that will give you a 1/4 inch seam, which is right on the dotted line. It's just a lot easier to see that this solid line is lined up. So then, just like normal, you'll just go around and lining up the 1/4 inch mark on, all right, there we go. Lining up the 1/4 inch mark on the inner solid line. And I can't wait. This is like the big reveal. We're almost there. Last seam, and then we get to see this cutie pie. All right, here's the big reveal. There we go. Isn't it cute? And you can place these half square triangles just like any direction you want, and they're just so much fun. Now that you've watched this tutorial, you have all the skills you need to go and sew your own Scrappy Triangle blocks or any other blocks of your choice. There are so many different Scrappy Triangle options. Go crazy, use up your scraps, use up your regular fabric, and have a blast making them. But one more thing before we stop, we need to talk about taking out these papers. When do you take them out? How do you take them out? And what is that like? So I would normally not remove the papers at this point, but I am going to demo it for you so that you know. Normally I would wait till I sewed this block together with a whole bunch of other Scrappy Triangle blocks, because this paper is stabilizing the block. We've got a whole bunch of bias seams along here, and without the paper in place, they can get all stretchy, and we just don't need to worry about that. So I'd sew it all together. Let's pretend that it's sewn together with a bunch of other blocks. I'm done with the top, or at least it's surrounded on all sides by blocks. And now it's time to take it out. All you do is just lift up the paper and pull it back. Comes off really easily. And I really like the sound when it comes off. This thinner paper is easier to tear than regular printer paper, but even printer paper is fine. If you're finding it hard to tear off, again, check your stitch length. If your stitch length is short and you're still finding it hard, you might want to use some sort of water pen. This pen is filled with regular plain water, and when you run it over the stitching lines, it makes the paper wet and it makes it even easier to pull off. Yeah, super, super nice. Somebody asked if it bled, made the ink bleed, and I'm not finding that it does. You're not putting down tons of water, so it's not really an issue. Oops. Yep, comes right off. All right. And this last one, oh, just caught by a few. Now I'm excited to go make more Scrappy Triangle blocks, and I hope you are too. Have fun sewing.